legend of the Unbroken, the Epic of Timur. Part 1. English, atmospheric, slow-paced, sleep-inducing yet powerful narration. Part 1. The night the stars bowed. The desert was quiet that night. Not the quiet of emptiness, nor the quiet of loneliness, but a sacred, breathing silence, as if the world itself were listening to something ancient awakening beneath its sands. The moon hung low, enormous and pale, like a watchful guardian. The wind moved softly, brushing over the dunes with the gentleness of a mother's hand, and in the heart of that hushed darkness, a boy sat alone, staring at the stars as if they were old friends whispering secrets. His name was Timur, not yet the conqueror, not yet the scourge of empires, not yet the man whose very shadow would bend kings and crumble kingdoms. He was simply a young soul with fire in his eyes and a scar of destiny on his back. That night, Timur felt something stir within him, a presence, a calling, an invisible thread pulling him toward the life he had not yet lived. He did not know that centuries later, people would speak his name with awe, fear, reverence, and wonder. He only knew that he was meant for something vast, something terrible, something magnificent. The earth around him felt alive. The sand beneath his feet pulsed faintly. The wind sang in strange, deliberate tones. Even the stars shimmered differently, as if turning their ancient faces toward the boy sitting alone in the cold desert. And then, the silence broke. A whisper, soft, barely audible, floated across the dunes. "Rise." Timur lifted his head. Another whisper followed, carried by the night wind like a forgotten prophecy waking from its slumber. "The world sleeps, but you will make it tremble." Timur's breath caught in his throat, that he was not afraid, that he felt no fear at all, only a strange, calm certainty, as if he had always known. As if this voice had spoken to him before, long before his birth, long before the world had taken shape, in that place where souls are forged from fire and fate. The wind continued. "Walk the path no man has walked. Break the walls no army has broken. Take the crown no king has dared touch." The boy stood, slowly, as though rising in answer to a command older than the stars themselves. His shadow stretched across the sand, longer, darker, sharper than any child's shadow had the right to be. And in that moment, beneath the moon and the trembling sky, Timur felt the truth settle inside his bones. He was not born for a single land, not for a tribe, not even for an empire. He was born for the world. A sudden gust swept through the desert, whirling the sand into a spiraling, shimmering dance around him. For a heartbeat, the night itself bowed, as if greeting a future emperor not yet crowned but already chosen. Timur closed his eyes. And when he opened them again, the innocent gaze of a child was gone. In its place burned the silent resolve of a man destiny could not ignore. The voice faded, the wind hushed, and the night returned to its tranquil stillness. But Timur was no longer the same. He turned toward the dark horizon, toward the lands he would one day carve his name into, and whispered to the quiet world, "If fate will not give me a throne, I will carve one with my own hands." And the desert, ancient and eternal, trembled softly beneath his feet. The legend of the Unbroken, the Epic of Timur. Part 2, The Boy of Iron. The dawn came slowly over the steppe, spilling pale gold over the endless waves of grass and sand.
Timur walked.
His feet were bare. His clothes were simple, worn wool, rough and patched, the garments of a boy who owned little. But his walk carried a strange gravity, as if each step he took was etching itself into the memory of the earth. The campfires of his tribe still smoked behind him. Far away now, little dots of gray rising into the waking sky that he did not look back often. He had said nothing when he left Dareno grand farewell, Dareno dramatic vow. He only slipped away while the world was still half asleep, with the quiet certainty of someone who knows that to explain himself would be a waste of breath. Those who could understand would not need an explanation. Those who needed an explanation could never understand. As he walked, the wind rustled through the dry grass, carrying with it faraway voices, snatches off sound, the laughter of men, the barking of dogs, the ringing of metal against metal. Somewhere beyond the horizon, armies trained. Somewhere, kings feasted. Somewhere, rulers planned tomorrow as if tomorrow belonged to them. Timur walked toward all of them. He did not know yet how he would arrive as a guest, a warrior, a conqueror, or a storm. But he knew this. He would not live a small life. The weight of a name. In those days, he was not yet known as Timur the Lame, nor Timur the Great, nor Lord of the Fortunate Conjunction. He was simply Timur ibn Taragai, a boy from a minor branch of a noble clan, from a land torn again and again by war, betrayal, and shifting power. As he grew, he saw many things. He saw men who boasted of ancient blood but trembled at the sound of steel, that he saw warriors strong in body but weak in mind, easily led by flattery, easily blinded by greed, that he saw leaders who thought a tent, a title, and a handful of loyal guards made them kings. Timur learned quietly. He listened when elders spoke of past battles. He memorized the names of generals and the mistakes they made. He studied maps drawn in the dust with a simple stick, tracing with his eyes the rivers, the passes, the trade routes, understanding that the world was not just lines and lands. It was veins, carrying the lifeblood of empires: food, trade, armies, stories. He watched horses more than he watched people. Horses did not lie. Horses did not pretend to be brave when they were afraid. They did not speak of honor and then run at the first sign of danger. A horse that feared you would show it. A horse that respected you would follow. Timur decided silently that he wished to rule more like a master of horses than a master of slaves. Not by begging for loyalty. By earning it.by, commanding it.by, becoming the kind of man others were afraid not to follow. Fire and wounds. It happened in his youth on a night like many others, when the world did not yet know his name and thought nothing of the boy with quiet eyes. A raid. A simple raid, or so they thought. One tribe against another, old grudges, new insults, land, honor, cattle, pride. The usual reasons men decide to kill each other. Timur rode with the others, his heart steady, his hand firm around the reins. The moon lit their path. The hooves drummed the earth in rhythm, like a war song. He had fought before, but never like this. The village they attacked was small, but desperation makes even small men dangerous. He dismounted in the chaos, moving through the shadows with the instinct of a hunter. The clash of steel and the screams of men rang in his ears, yet inside, a calm center remained untouched. He moved as if his body knew what to do before his mind gave it command. Duck, strike, turn, advance, retreat. It was almost like a dance, a brutal, ruthless dance written by survival and guided by something deeper. He saw an enemy, older, his beard streaked with gray, eyes burning with the fury of someone defending everything he had ever loved. Timur stepped toward him. Their blades met. The man was strong, experienced. His strikes were heavy and precise. Timur felt the shock of each blow move up his arms like waves of stone. They circled each other, sparks flying when steel met steel. "You are young," the man grunted between blows. His accent was rough, foreign. "You should have stayed in your mother's tent." Timur didn't answer. Words in moments like this were a waste. The man lunged. Timur sidestepped, not enough. Pain tore through his leg and hip like a flash of lightning. The world tilted. His knee struck the ground. He had been wounded. The cut was deep, cruel, tearing through flesh, muscle, and the confidence of youth in one swift stroke. The man kicked him down, towering above him. For a heartbeat, the world slowed. The sound of war faded to a distant echo. The cold earth pressed against Timur's palms, his blood spilled, warm and slow, into the hungry ground. Most boys would have surrendered then, frozen in that moment where death seems closer than breath. Timur did not. He saw with terrifying clarity not the face of the man about to kill him, but the shadow of a world in which he died here, as nobody, forgotten, an unremarkable casualty of an unremarkable raid. He rejected it. Something ancient stirred in his chest, roaring awake. He grabbed a handful of dirt and blood, and as the man raised his sword for the final blow, Timur threw it into his eyes. The man cursed, stumbling, blinded for a moment. A moment was all Timur needed. He sprang up, ignoring the agony tearing through his leg. His blade rose in a clean, unhesitating arc. When the man fell, the ground shook more than it should have for one single body. Timur stood there, chest heaving, leg burning, breath ragged. He was alive. But something had changed. The wound in his leg would never fully heal. It would scar. It would twist. It would mark his walk forever. They would later call him Timur Lang, Timur the Lame. The world would laugh behind his back. They would whisper. They would mock. He decided that if they would speak his name with laughter, he would force them to end that laughter with fear. The man with the broken step. The weeks that followed were a slow, stubborn war between Timur and his own body. Every step hurt. The wound pulled, burned, throbbed with its own cruel heartbeat at a night. The pain crawled like fire through his bones, keeping him awake long after others had fallen into deep, peaceful sleep. But he refused to let the pain rule him. He walked. He trained. He forced his muscles to obey. When his leg trembled and buckled, he forced himself up again. When he fell, he did not ask for help. He dug his fingers into the earth and pushed himself upright. Some nights, when the pain was too much, he would lie awake and stare at the sky. His eyes would search for the same stars that had watched him that night in the desert, when the wind had whispered promises and commands. "Is this your gift?" he would think. "This broken step? This crooked walk?" But he never cursed fate aloud. He knew a secret most people never learn. Fate does not listen to complaints. It listens to decisions. So he made one. If the world insisted on calling him lame, he would become something else entirely. A man whose mind walked further than any leg could carry. A man whose will reached farther than any arrow. A man whose name marched ahead of him like an army. The body could falter, the step could drag, but the soul, that was where true power walked. The first followers. A leader is not a leader because he declares himself one. A leader is a mirror in which men see the shape of the future. At first, Timur was just a wounded young warrior, moving with a slight limp, eyes too calm for his age, too focused, too quiet. But some men noticed. They noticed the way he studied the land before a raid, the way he could predict where an enemy would run, where they would hide. They noticed that he never panicked even when others did. He spoke little. When he did, it was not to impress, but to cut straight through confusion like a blade through silk. One evening, after a small skirmish where Timur had led a small group through an unseen path and flanked the enemy, one of the older warriors approached him. His name was Jahangir, a man with scars on his face and the solid, unshakable presence of someone who had seen too many winters to be impressed by youth. "You move like a man who sees the battle before it begins," Jahangir said, sitting beside him near the fire. Timur said nothing at first. The flames crackled between them. The air smelled of sweat, iron, and horse. "Others rush forward," Jahangir continued. "You wait, you watch, then you strike when no one expects it. That is not common among boys." Timur poked the fire lightly with a stick. "A sword is sharp," he said softly, "but if the hand holding it is foolish, the sword dies with the man." Jahangir studied him for a long moment. "You are wounded," the older warrior said. "Yes." "You will never walk without pain again." "I know." "You might even move slower than others." "Perhaps," Timur agreed with a faint ghost of a smile. "Then I will simply make sure I think faster than they can move." Silence. Then slowly Jahangir nodded. "I will ride with you," he said. It was not a dramatic oath, no grand ceremony. Just 7 simple words spoken by a man whose loyalty, once given, was a fortress. Others followed. Not at once, not in a flood, but in a slow, steady trickle. Men who were tired of weak leaders. Men who wanted more than just survival, they wanted meaning. They were drawn to the boy with the calm eyes and the broken step, the one who spoke of battles like a chess game, the one whose presence made even campfire plans feel like the first lines of a great story. They did not yet know what he would become, but they sensed something rare. Quiet vow. One night, as the camp slept and the wind moved gently through the grasslands, Timur sat alone on a small rise overlooking the tents. The moon was a thin curve in the sky, delicate and sharp like a blade of silver. His leg ached, a deep, gnawing ache that never truly left. He pressed his hand lightly against it, feeling the scar through the fabric. "If this is the price," he whispered to the night, "then let it be a small one." His gaze traveled over the sleeping camp, the men who had begun to follow him, the horses tied, resting, the distant glow of other tribes' fires across the dark horizon. So many men, he thought, living and dying in circles born, they heard, they fight, They drink, they boast, they die. They leave nothing behind but a stone, a story, a song easily forgotten. He did not want that. He wanted to leave marks that could not be erased. Cities changed, maps redrawn, laws rewritten, lines of power torn up and drawn anew by his own hand. He wanted the world to remember that he had existed, not as a rumor, not as a minor name in a list of forgotten rulers, but as a storm. He closed his eyes and made a vow, not to gods, not to spirits, not even to the stars, but to himself. "I will rise," he promised quietly. "No matter how many times I fall, that I will unite what is broken, that I will crush what stands in the way, that I will walk, even if I must drag my leg through blood and dust, and I will not know defeat." The wind moved, as if in answer, brushing against his face like a cold blessing. Far away, empires slept peacefully, comforted by their walls, their thrones, their gold. They did not know that somewhere in the darkness, a young man with a wounded leg and an unbroken will had just declared war on the shape of the world. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur. Part 3, the first shadow of a conqueror. Dawn crawled across the steppe like a slow-burning fuse, brightening the horizon with soft embers of gold and rose. Timur stood before his small band of warriors, no more than 20 at the time, their faces hardened by wind and hunger, their eyes bright with a strange mixture of trust, ambition, and something very close to fear. Not fear of him, fear for him. He was wounded that he limped. His body argued with him every morning, each step a reminder of that night when blood had baptized him into a harsher destiny. But his spirit had become sharper, more defined, like metal forged in fire. When Timur spoke, the men listened. Not because he demanded it, but because his voice carried weight, not loudness, but clarity. The birth of the wolf band. The first men who followed him were outcasts. Not criminals, just the kind the world had overlooked. A hunter whose family had starved one winter, a young archer rejected by his clan for being too quiet, two brothers who had lost their home in a raid, a swordsman who preferred thinking to drinking, a dangerous quality in men of the steppe. These were not polished warriors. They were raw iron, hard, cold, shapeless. And Timur was the fire. He trained them relentlessly, not with brute force alone, but with strategy, with discipline, with a vision few could understand. He taught them to read the land, the way grass bent in the wind, the way horses twitched their ears at distant sound, the way shadows lengthened differently when danger approached. He taught them silence. A man who can remain silent in thought can become thunder in action. Soon they moved like shadows across the plains, not a band of wandering warriors, but the beginning of something greater, something that glimmered faintly like the first star before a storm. First blood of destiny. Their first true test came under a reddening sky, when smoke rose from a distant caravan like a dark flag of opportunity. A group of raiders, ruthless, disorganized, greedy, had descended upon the merchants like wolves on lambs. Timur watched from a hilltop. The merchants were fighting back, but poorly. Their knives too small, their arms too weak, their movements frantic. "They will die," one of Timur's men muttered. "Not if we reach them first," Timur said quietly. The others exchanged glances. "There are more raiders than us," Jahangir pointed out. Timur smiled faintly. "That only matters to men who count enemies," he said. "We count weaknesses." They descended the hill like a wind-blown fire, silent, steady, unstoppable. Timur's limp did not slow him. Pain burned through his leg with each step, but he let the fire guide him. Pain is a reminder. You are still alive, you still have work to do. The clash was sudden. A raid within a raid, chaos consuming chaos. Timur's men struck like precision knives. Small in number, enormous in impact. In the heart of the battle, Timur confronted the raiders' leader at a tall, muscular brute with a scar across his chest. Their blades collided. The man roared insults. Timur said nothing. Silence is the most unnerving answer in war. The fight lasted only seconds, one misstep from the brute, one calculated strike from Timur. When the man fell, the remaining raiders scattered. Timur did not chase them. Victory was not measured by bodies, but by control. The merchant's words. After the battle, an old merchant approached Timur, his face trembling from adrenaline and fear. "You saved us," he said. His voice shook. His hands shook. Even his breath shook. Timur wiped his blade clean on the grass before answering. "No," he said calmly. "We saved ourselves. You were simply in the same place." The merchant stared at him for a long moment, not understanding the reply, but understanding something far greater, that this young man was no ordinary wanderer. "Tell me your name," the merchant said, bowing his head. "Timur," he replied. The man repeated it under his breath, as if testing the weight of it. "You will be great," the merchant said suddenly. The word surprised even him. "Greater than anyone I have met. That is what my bones tell me." Timur's eyes glinted in the setting sun. "Then listen to your bones," he said softly. "They are wiser than most men." From that day on, stories began to spread quietly along the trade routes. Stories of a young warrior with a broken step and an unbroken spirit. Whispers traveled like seeds in the wind. Some called him the Iron Boy. Some said he was touched by destiny. Some feared he was a storm forming across the horizon. But only one title mattered to him: leader. And he was becoming one. Slowly, steadily, inevitably. The great betrayal. But no man rises without stirring the jealousy of lesser souls. And among Timur's followers, there was one who could not bear to see him rise, a man named Karakul. He was strong, he was skilled. But he lacked the one thing Timur had: purpose. A man without purpose envies the man who has one. Karakul began whispering in the shadows, feeding poison into the ears of the weak-minded. "Timur is wounded," he would say. "He cannot lead us far. His fame grows too fast. He will use us, then leave us. He is too quiet. Quiet men hide ambition." Little by little, a small faction listened. Jealous men listened to jealous words. One night, under a moon drowned in clouds, Karakul approached Timur as he slept. With a knife. What happened next became one of the first stories sung about Timur in the steppe. Timur awoke. Not from sound. Not from movement. From instinct. A cold lightning shot through his gut, the warning of a man who had already faced death once and refused to let it touch him again. His eyes opened. Karakul's blade hovered above his throat. Timur grabbed the man's wrist with impossible speed. Pain screamed through his wounded leg as he surged upward, but he did not hesitate. The knife turned. Karakul gasped. The others rushed in, hearing the struggle. But by the time they arrived, it was over. Karakul lay on the ground, eyes wide open, his betrayal frozen forever on his face. Timur stood above him, breathing slowly, blood dripping from his fingers. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "A traitor dies once. A coward dies many times. But a man of honor, he lives forever." The camp fell silent, and something shifted that night. The men realized this truth. Timur did not lead them because they followed. They followed because he was a man meant to lead. The rise of the wolf. Weeks passed. The small band grew. More warriors joined. More stories spread. More enemies began to fear the shadow that moved quietly across the plains. Timur's limp remained, but men learned to read it differently. It was no longer a weakness. It was a symbol, a reminder that even broken bones could hold the weight of destiny. Soon, even his enemies whispered, "Beware the man who walks with pain, for pain has taught him things comfort never will." Timur was no longer only a boy with a scar. No longer a lone wanderer. He was becoming a force, a wolf gathering other wolves, a storm gathering its clouds, a conqueror gathering his future. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur. Part 4, The Architect of Power. Night settled slowly over the plains, stretching long shadows across the tents of Timur's growing band. The fires crackled, men sharpened their blades, horses pawed the ground with restless hooves. Timur watched it all with quiet satisfaction. He had begun with 20 men. Now he had nearly 100. Not a vast army, but large enough to be noticed, dangerous enough to be respected, and disciplined enough to be feared. The steppe had many warriors, but warriors alone do not build legends. Legends are made by those who know how to build power, brick by invisible brick, decision by quiet decision. And Timur had begun building, not with swords but with minds, not with raids but with alliances, not with noise but with silence. The Council of Shadows. Timur gathered his closest men in a circle around the fire: Jahangir, the brothers Arslan and Keldi, the scout Bahadur, the archer Kutluk, and a handful of others who had proven loyalty through both blood and silence. They were not nobles. They were not scholars. They were not generals. But they were intelligent, observant, honest in the way only men who had tasted hunger and fear can be. Timur wanted minds, not titles. "What do you see?" he asked, pointing at the night horizon where faint lights glimmered far away. "A camp," someone said. "A small army," said another. "A tribe on the move." Timur nodded. "All true," he said, "but incomplete." The men exchanged confused glances. Timur continued, "You see a tribe. I see its weaknesses. You see a camp. I see the routes they depend on. You see men. I see the fears that lead them. You see warriors. I see who can be bought. You see chiefs. I see which ones are stupid." The circle fell silent. This was why they followed him. Because where others saw what was, Timur saw what could be. The first alliance. Weeks later, a messenger arrived from the Barlas clan. Timur's bloodline, distant and fractious, torn by disputes, threatened by neighboring tribes, as unstable as the shifting sands. They needed help. Not a glowing invitation, a desperate one. The young chief, Amir Hussein, was failing to hold power. Rivals circled him like vultures waiting for a slower heartbeat. Timur saw his chance. Not to serve, but to rise. He rode to meet Amir Hussein with 40 of his best men. The encounter was tense, two young leaders, both proud, both ambitious. Amir Hussein had fine clothing, fine horses, fine tents, fine food. Timur had none of this. But Timur had something Hussein did not. Strength that came from surviving storms, not from inheriting shelter. They sat across from one another. Amir Hussein spoke first. "You have men," he said. "Good men." Timur nodded once. "They follow." "We have enemies." "You have many." Hussein's eyes narrowed. "You speak boldly for a man of smaller rank." Timur's voice remained calm. "I speak truth. Rank does not change truth." The tent went silent. Then, unexpectedly, Amir Hussein smiled. "I like you," he said, "and I need you." Timur inclined his head slightly. "But hear this," Hussein continued. "You may rise with me. You may fight beside me. But you will always remember, I am the chief." Timur's eyes glinted with quiet amusement. He bowed, not deeply, not submissively, just enough to be polite, just enough to appear agreeable. Inside, he thought only one thing, for now: the first test of strategy. Amir Hussein's clan soon faced a threat, a rival tribe marching toward their territory, armed, numerous, confident. Hussein panicked. His generals argued. His advisors shouted over one another. But Timur sat silent. When Hussein finally asked him for advice, Timur rose slowly, leaning on his slightly wounded leg, and approached the map drawn on the ground. He studied it in silence. Then he spoke. "You are planning to fight them where they are strongest." Hussein frowned. "It is the only open terrain." Timur shook his head. "You do not need open terrain. You need to choose where they die." The men muttered among themselves. Timur moved a single stone on the map, placing it at a narrow valley between two small hills. "Here," he said. "The enemy will have to enter in a long line. Their numbers will mean nothing. Their horses will be trapped. Their archers will have no angle." A general scoffed. "That is too tight. We cannot maneuver either." Timur smiled faintly. "We do not need to maneuver. We need to choke them." The room fell silent. Even Hussein felt it. That strange energy in the air, the feeling that the young man with the limp saw the battlefield like a god looking down from above. Finally, Hussein nodded. "Timur will lead the ambush." The Valley of Screams. At dawn, Timur and 50 of his chosen men took positions in the narrow valley. Their armor was minimal, their weapons were sharp, their breaths were steady. Timur stood at the front, leaning slightly on his spear, as calm as if he were waiting for moonrise. When the enemy began entering the valley, their horses grew uneasy, nervous at the tightness, the echoing walls, the stillness of the air. Then came the moment. Timur lifted his hand. It fell, and the valley exploded into violence. His men rained arrows from above. Warriors charged from hidden side paths. Boulders rolled down the slopes. Confusion became panic. Panic became collapse. The enemy had walked willingly into their grave. Timur moved through the carnage not like a berserker, but like an artist finishing a painting, each strike precise, each glance calculating, each motion a piece of a larger vision. By sunset, the battle was over, and Timur's name was no longer whispered. It was spoken loudly. It was spoken boldly. It carried weight. Even Hussein felt it. Men spoke with awe. He sees the battlefield before we even step onto it. He is young, but his mind is old. He limps, but he moves like a wolf. A legend was being born. Shift in the balance. Over the following months, something subtle happened. Something Hussein failed to notice until it was too late. Men began going to Timur for advice. Not Hussein. Men listened to Timur's words, not Hussein's. Men followed Timur into battles with confidence. Hussein with obligation. Timur did not challenge Hussein. He did not threaten him. He did not disobey. He simply outshone him. And the steppe is a place where the brightest fire becomes the one others gather around. Night of the Hawk. One night, Timur stood outside the camp alone, gazing up at the stars that had watched him since childhood. A hawk circled overhead, silent, graceful, ruthless. He watched it as it hovered, shifted, and then plummeted toward the ground, catching a mouse between its talons. Timur murmured softly, "Speed is useful, strength is useful, but precision conquers worlds." He limped back toward the camp with a faint smile. His shadow stretched long behind him, the shadow of a man whose mind had begun to shape the future. A storm was forming. Men felt it. Enemies sensed it. The land itself seemed to brace for it. And Timur, the boy once wounded in a nameless raid, was now walking toward his first true empire. The Legend of the Unbroken, the Epic of Timur. Part 5, The Fire That Does Not Bow. The wind over the steppe grew colder, sharper, hungrier, as if the land itself knew a great shift was coming. Timur's reputation had grown like wildfire. Whispers carried his name farther than any caravan could travel, in distant outposts. Soldiers spoke of the young commander with a limp, the one who saw battles before they happened. Merchants prayed to cross paths with him, and rivals quietly sharpened their blades. But the man who felt the pressure most intensely was not an enemy. It was Amir Hussein. At first, Hussein had welcomed Timur's rise. A talented commander was a valuable asset, a sharp dagger to wield against rivals. But Hussein soon realized something terrifying. The dagger had a will of its own. Timur did not just win battles, he reshaped the battlefield, he did not just inspire men, hechinjet them. And a leader who can change many's more dangerous than a leader who can command them. The first cracks. As Timur's influence spread, Hussein grew increasingly restless. He began calling more councils, demanding more control, issuing more rules. Timur followed every rule, just enough to show respect, but never enough to appear weak. One evening, Hussein confronted him in the command tent. "You speak with my warriors as if they were your own," Hussein snapped. Timur looked at him steadily. "They seek my counsel," he said simply. "Because you encourage it." Timur shook his head. "Men seek truth where they find it." Hussein slammed his fist on the table. "I am the chief. They must come home." Timur's voice remained calm, too calm, which angered Hussein even more. "Then give them reason to." Silence. It was the boldest, most dangerous thing Timur had ever said. But he had spoken truth, truth that struck Hussein harder than any sword. Hussein stared at him, jaw clenched, eyes burning. Finally, he spat. "Be careful, Timur. You rise too quickly." Timur bowed his head just slightly. "A tree does not choose how fast it grows," he said softly, "but it chooses how deep its roots go." Hussein stormed out. A leader is measured by his men. After that night, the tension between them hung in the air like a drawn bowstring. But Timur continued his work. He trained his men, honed their discipline, taught them strategy, and forged them into something more than a band of fighters. They became the Iron Wolves, a force known for their precision, their silence, their unwavering loyalty to Timur. Where other warriors boasted, Timur's men observed. Where others drank, Timur's men trained. Where others followed commands, Timur's men followed purpose. The difference was night and day, and impossible to ignore. Even Hussein's own soldiers began whispering. Timur builds leaders. Hussein builds excuses. This whisper reached Hussein eventually and poisoned him from the inside. The gathering storm. One night, Jahangir approached Timur as he stood alone outside his tent, watching the moon cast pale light across the plains. "Lord," Jahangir said quietly. It was the first time he had used that title. Timur turned, eyebrow raised. Jahangir continued, "Hussein is plotting that he gathers those loyal to him. They fear your rise." Timur sighed softly. "Fear," he murmured, "is the tax a small mind pays for watching a greater one." Jahangir frowned. "This is no time for poetry. He may move against you." Timur smiled faintly. "A man who acts out of fear moves clumsily. Let him." Jahangir stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Some men would kill to protect their position." Timur's eyes glinted. "And some men," he said, "would build the position itself. The test of loyalty." Soon after, a messenger from a rival tribe approached Timur's camp. A sly, sharp-eyed man with a forked tongue. He offered Timur land, gold, and a high position if Timur would abandon Hussein and join them. Timur listened quietly. When the man finished, Timur asked one question. "Why do you come to me, not to Hussein?" The messenger smirked. "Hussein leads by title. You lead by nature." Timur's voice dropped to a whisper. "And nature," he said, "is not bought." He rose from his seat, leaning on his spear, his limp more pronounced after a long day of marching. "You mistake me for a man who desires gifts. But a true leader," he said, stepping closer, "takes only what he has earned." The messenger swallowed hard. Timur leaned in. "And what I earn, I keep." He turned away. Jahangir seized the messenger and escorted him out. There was no need to kill him. The fear alone would spread the message far faster than a corpse. And the message was simple. Timur's loyalty could not be bought. Timur's hatred, however, that was priceless. The seed of a throne. As tensions grew, so did Timur's understanding of power. He saw now that battles were only half of conquest. The other half was perception. A man could rule through fear or admiration or wisdom. But Timur learned that the most unshakable power came from something else entirely. Inevitable respect. The kind of respect that made even enemies hesitate. The kind that made allies sleep more peacefully knowing he was on their side. The kind that made men follow without questioning why. One night, as the wind carried the scent of distant rain, Timur stood alone beneath the stars. His leg throbbed with dull fire. His breath rose in pale clouds. He spoke softly to the empty night. "I do not seek a throne made of gold or silk. I seek one carved from the bones of my decisions, from the loyalty of men, from the fear of those who oppose me, from the respect of those who walk beside me." A long silence followed. Then he whispered, "And I will earn it." The wind stirred, or perhaps bowed. The boiling point. Hussein could no longer ignore what everyone already knew. Men followed him, but they believed Timur. And belief is far more dangerous than obedience. One evening, Hussein confronted Timur again. But this time, his eyes were not angry. They were afraid. "Timur," he said quietly, "you are rising too fast. Faster than I can control." Timur did not deny it. Hussein continued, voice shaking, "Promise me you will not take what is mine." Timur stepped forward. His limp gave him a strange, uneven rhythm, but somehow it made him look even more formidable. "What is truly yours," he said, "no man can take. And what is not yours," Timur added softly, "you cannot keep." Hussein paled. Timur turned away, the conversation finished. But in that moment, in that single, quiet exchange, a future war was born. Not fought with swords, but with destiny. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur. Part 6, the breaking of brothers, the making of a king. The wind that swept across the steppe carried a new scent, the scent of change. Not change that arrives quietly, but the kind that prowls like a wolf in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to bite. Timur felt it long before others did. A tightening of the air, a lurking tension in the camps, whispers that floated between tents like restless spirits. And at the center of it all was Amir Hussein. Once an ally, once a brother in arms, once someone Timur respected. But power does not tolerate equals. And Hussein had realized the truth too late. Timur was no longer his rising star. Timur was his eclipse. The silent war begins. The first signs were small. Hussein began excluding Timur from councils, holding secret meetings, sending scouts without informing him. But men noticed. And what men notice, they talk about. Soon the whispers grew. Hussein fears him. Hussein plots. Hussein's throne shakes. And beneath those whispers was another, one that traveled like a spark through dry grass. What if Timur led us instead? When this reached Hussein's ears, his fear turned poisonous. He doubled the guards around his tent, that he scrutinized every word spoken in council, that he slept lightly, waking at the sound of a leaf falling. Fear is the slowest and most humiliating death. But Timur did not move against Hussein. Not yet. A wolf does not attack a trembling animal immediately. It waits to see if the tremble becomes a mistake. The broken feast. The breaking point came during a feast meant to celebrate recent victories. Hussein sat at the head of the table, surrounded by nobles, drowning his insecurity in wine. Timur sat lower, surrounded by warriors, the very men who had given those victories to Hussein. As the feast grew loud and chaotic, Hussein slammed his cup down and rose. "I have heard," he said with a drunken snarl, "that some among us think themselves greater than their chief." The room fell silent. Timur looked up slowly, eyes calm, expression unreadable. Hussein staggered forward, pointing directly at him. "You," he hissed, "you dare gather men behind my back. You dare speak as if you command them. You dare outshine me." The entire hall held its breath. Then Timur stood. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with a slow, deliberate motion that made every man present feel as if the ground shifted. "Hussein," Timur said quietly, "a chief who fears shadows should not look at the sun." The hall trembled. Hussein's face turned crimson. "You insult me?" Timur stepped closer, so close Hussein could see the fire reflected in his eyes. "I speak truth," he said. "You fear losing power, and frightened leaders fall before they are pushed." Hussein raised his hand, trembling. His guard stepped forward, but Hussein suddenly dropped his hand. Cowardice had choked him silent. Timur simply bowed his head lightly, turned, and walked away. The feast continued, but nothing tasted the same. The night without stars. That night, Hussein made his choice. Fear demanded a sacrifice, and fear always chooses the strongest target. He sent assassins. 7 men, faces covered, blades oiled to silence their shine, moving like phantoms toward Timur's tent. But Timur did not sleep. His instinct, the same instinct that saved him years ago, pulled him awake seconds before the assassins entered. Jahangir barged through the tent flap, whispering urgently, "Lord, they come." Timur reached for his sword, but his voice remained calm. "Let them." The assassins burst into the tent and found it empty. Then a voice behind them, "You hunt the wrong prey." Timur stood outside, his men surrounding the assassins. No battle followed. The assassins dropped their weapons. Fear had beaten them before Timur's blade could. Timur dismissed his men, approached the trembling leader of the attackers, and whispered, "Go back to Hussein. Tell him this. He has lost the right to fear me. From now on, he will fear what I become." He let them live. Mercy is sometimes the sharpest blade. The separation. The next morning, Timur acted. Not with rage, not with dramatic threats, but with precision. He gathered his loyal men, now nearly 300, and addressed them under the early sun. "Hussein has chosen to rule with fear," Timur said. "We choose to walk a different path." "Where do we go?" someone asked. Timur pointed toward the distant hills burning orange with sunrise. where the future calls us." The men mounted their horses without question. As they rode away, the sun cast long shadows behind them, shadows of a force that was no longer part of Hussein's story. Timur did not look back. A man looking forward does not turn to fading things. The wolf builds his own lair. Timur and his growing army established their own base. A low plateau, naturally fortified, overlooking trade roads and rivers, with space for tents, horses, and future ambition. Timur renamed it Iron Hill. It became the birthplace of his empire. Here he trained men ruthlessly. Here he forged alliances with local chiefs. Here he planned strategies that would one day reshape continents. And word spread. Timur had broken from Hussein. Timur was building something new. Timur was rising fast. Rivals who once ignored him now watched him with wary eyes. Hussein, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. A ruler losing loyalties like a man drowning in dust. The fire awakens. One evening, as the wind howled across Iron Hill, Timur stood overlooking the plains, his cloak whipping behind him like a dark flag. Jahangir approached quietly. "Lord," he said, "the men ask when we will confront Hussein." Timur did not answer immediately. He watched the horizon, the same horizon he had watched as a boy when the stars whispered destiny into his bones. Finally, he spoke, "Hussein will fall, not because I strike him, but because he has already struck himself." Jahangir frowned. "I do not understand." Timur turned to him. "When a leader fears his own men, his throne is already broken." A long silence passed. Then Timur added, "And a broken throne is easy to take." The wind roared across the hilltop, as if applauding. Timur closed his eyes briefly. The boy who once limped through pain was gone. The man who stood here now was a storm clothed in flesh. A conqueror in the making. A fire that would not bow. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur. Part 7, When Two Suns Cannot Share the Sky. The steppe was strangely quiet that morning.
Not barış sessizliği fırtınadan önce gelen, toprağın bile nefesini tuttuğu o ağır sessizlik.
Far to the west, inside his fortified settlement, Amir Hussein paced like a trapped wolf. His advisors whispered behind curtains. His guards stood stiff, their eyes darting at shadows. Hussein felt it. The end. Not because Timur marched yet, he hadn't. Not because Timur threatened him, he never needed to. Hussein felt the end because his own men had stopped believing in him. Belief is the true crown. Lose that, and gold or silk cannot save you. Timur's stand on Iron Hill. On Iron Hill, Timur prepared not for war, but for inevitability. He gathered his officers, Jahangir, Arslan, Keldi, Kutluk, Bahadur, and laid out the plan. A plan that was not merely for defeating Hussein. A plan for replacing him. Timur spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. "Hussein's allies are tired," he said. "They hold power only for pride, not for purpose." He moved a stone on the ground map. When purpose is gone, men change banners. Another stone. And they have already begun to change. The officers murmured. Jahangir nodded slowly. You believe they will abandon Hussein once we march? Timur's eyes shone with absolute certainty. I do not believe, he said. Inno. How? Because I would abandon him, Timur replied. I would not follow a man who fears his own shadow. Silence followed. Not disagreement, not doubt. Respect. The kind that hardens in the bones. The march of iron. Timur's forces moved at dawn. 300 men had grown to nearly 2,000. Not because Timur begged for loyalty, but because loyalty seeks the one who deserves it. They rode like a dark river across the plains. Silent, disciplined, inevitable. Every village they passed watched with awe. Many joined. Some sent their sons. Others sent supplies. Word traveled faster than hooves. Timur is marching on Hussein. Timur will take the throne. Timur comes as fate itself. By the time they reached Hussein'in sınırları, Timur'un ordusu neredeyse yüz bin almıştı.
Husayn'ın ordusu daha büyüktü, kağıt üzerinde. Ama sayılar kalpsiz adamlarla doluysa hiçbir anlam ifade etmez.
The fracturing of Hussein's camp. Hussein tried to rally his men. He shouted, he threatened, he made grand promises. But when a leader fears, the louder he shouts, the smaller he becomes. Silent disputes began to stir among Hussein's officers. Some said, "We will not fight Timur. This is a leader even the stars refuse to turn their backs on." Others, "Timur will win, we should switch sides first." Hussein saw this, he snapped, he screamed, swung his sword, issued orders. But no one heard those orders anymore. A leader's voice dies long before his sword does. The meeting before the storm. Before Timur struck the final blow, he sent a messenger to Hussein. "Timur wishes to speak with you," the messenger said, "not for peace, but so you can look truth in the face." Hussein trembled, but he accepted. They met as two men, once brothers, now two leaders standing on opposite sides of fate. They met in a barren plain between two armies, where the wind cut the grass like blades. Hussein spoke first. His voice cracked, his pride shattered. "Timur, once you walked beside me." Timur's reply was not harsh. In fact, it was painfully simple. "Hussein, you were walking, I was looking toward the future." Hussein's eyes filled. "Have you come to kill me?" Timur shook his head gently. "I will not kill you. You killed yourself, I am only uncovering the earth you buried your fate under." Hussein fell to his knees. Timur turned his back and walked away. And in that moment Hussein understood. Timur's mercy was powerful too. His turning away hurt more than any wound a blade could make. The collapse. When Timur returned, he saw that many of Hussein's own men had already switched sides. That night, chaos erupted in Hussein's camp. Some men wanted to kill him, some wanted to protect him, some just wanted to flee. Chaos is the child born from the absence of a leader. Before dawn, Timur's army advanced. But in front of them was not an army, just a crowd devouring itself. With precise, controlled strikes, and without unnecessary bloodshed, Timur's forces seized the camp. And at its center, Hussein was captured. Once a powerful man, now trembling like a candle about to go out. Timur stood before him. "Hussein," he said, "I was never your enemy. You were the enemy of your own destiny. Hussein wept. Timur turned away again. He gave the order. Do not kill him, but never let him lead again. Even Timur's mercy ruled with authority. The throne of the steppe. With Hussein's fall, no force remained that could stop Timur. The Barlas clan begged him to take leadership. Other tribes pledged support. Merchants, warriors, scholars sought him out. And one morning on Iron Hill, before thousands of warriors, a robe was placed on Timur's shoulders. Simple, unadorned, but heavier in meaning than all the gold in the world. Timur lifted his head. He addressed his people. I did not come to be your king, I came to awaken your destiny. The crowd roared like thunder. That day, Timur's name ceased to be merely a warrior's name. That day, his name became synonymous with power, will, justice, fear, and fate. That day, the world witnessed the birth of a new leader. And that leader would never know defeat. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part 11, when the North remembers fear. After Khorasan and Iran fell, the world held its breath. An invisible shadow moved across continents. This shadow was neither an army nor a state. It was the will of a single man, Timur. Timur was in a palace at the heart of Iran, not among stone walls and golden domes, but in a war-worn, quiet, simple tent. Because for Timur, a leader's strength was not measured by the throne he sat on, but by the will he stood upon. But that night, Timur's mind did not turn east. It turned north. To the dark, frozen lands where the wind cut like bone. To the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde, a sleeping monster. The Golden Horde, one of the greatest powers of Eurasia. The heir of the Mongol giant that had once been the world's nightmare. Thousands of horsemen, endless steppes, a people forged in war. But now there was a problem. Their ruler was weak. Their beys were at each other's throats. The throne stood so high that no one could truly claim it, yet so ownerless that everyone dared to try. And at their head stood one man. Tokhtamysh, Timur's old friend, the very ruler Timur himself had once supported. But power poisons friendship. A throne makes loyalty fade. Tokhtamysh had begun to feel shame whenever he heard Timur's name. And in time, that shame turned into hatred. The letter that broke peace. One morning, a letter came to Timur, bearing the seal of the Golden Horde. Tokhtamysh had written, I alone am now the great sovereign. I will no longer obey you. I will redraw our borders. Your power has grown, I admit, but I do not fear you. Timur slowly closed the letter. There was no anger on his face, no surprise. Only a deep disappointment. Old friend, he thought, you were once one of my victories. Now you have become one of my tests. Jahangir quickly approached. Lord, Tokhtamysh is challenging us. Timur tapped his finger once on the table. That single tap silenced everyone in the room. Friendship is a gift, Timur said. Betrayal is an opportunity. The Council of the Endless Steppe. Timur gathered his great council. On the map before them, he drew a long line northward toward vast, frozen lands. Tokhtamysh, he said, thinks himself great. The Arslan brothers laughed. Lord, that man cannot even kill your shadow. Timur shook his head. Do not underestimate him. It was I who raised him up. Everyone I raise leaves a mark when they fall. Bahadur asked, Then what is your plan? Timur leaned closer to the map and whispered, I will drown him in the steppe. The march to the north when a continent trembles. Timur gathered his army. Tens of thousands of mounted archers, the Black Wolves, a armored falcon cavalry, engineer corps, intelligence couriers, and a logistics network unlike anything seen before. The army marched north. Before sunrise, the wind roared, the earth froze, white mist poured from the horses' mouths. But not a single soldier stopped, because in front of them rode Timur. Even his way of walking was like a command. One soldier said, If Timur is marching, then the world must be waiting for him. The fire and ice strategy. The north was cold, bitterly cold. The cold itself was an enemy. Armies die in the cold. Animals perish from thirst. Supplies freeze and rot. But Timur devised a way to overcome even nature. 1. The line of fire at every point along the army's path. Huge tents were set up. Inside, fires burned, water was heated, and the soldiers were warmed. The cold bowed before Timur's will. 2. Marching on frozen rivers, then Timur did what no one expected. He marched his army over frozen rivers. What would have taken ordinary armies months, Timur's army covered in a matter of weeks. Tokhtamysh's spies were shocked. This is impossible, they said. But Timur's army existed make the impossible possible. Tokhtamysh's last stand, the Battle of Kundurcha. The sky was leaden gray. The wind was ice. The steppe stretched as an endless sheet of white. Tokhtamysh stood across the field with his army, numerous, fast, warlike, but tired, demoralized. Timur's army approached like a black flood. Before the battle, Timur mounted his horse and rode to the front of his army. He raised his voice. Today, we are not here to defeat invincibility, but to defeat betrayal. The army roared. Then the battle began. Timur's tactics were unmatched. He pretended to retreat, luring the enemy into a trap. Light cavalry encircled them from the right flank. The Black Wolves crashed into the left flank, tearing through the enemy's heart. Archers let death fly with the wind at their backs. And in the final blow, Timur's iron wall unit struck. The steppe watched as Tokhtamysh's army was shattered. Tokhtamysh fled. But the message to the world was clear. Anyone who challenges Timur must run faster than death itself. The northern nightmare ends. The Golden Horde was broken apart. Tokhtamysh's power was destroyed. All the tribes of the north bowed to Timur. A poet wrote, Timur walked to the north, and even the sun warmed itself beside him. Northern kings knelt, for even the snow feared his footsteps. Timurid Verilin Yeni Unvan, the new titles given to Timur. After this campaign, the people gave him new names. The unbending lord of the north, the unbeaten of the unbeaten, the scourge of false kings. But Timur's favorite title was this, the restorer of order, because he did not merely conquer Herodorth world. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part 12, the mountains that bowed. After the fall of the Golden Horde, the world realized something new. Timur was not only fighting men, he was fighting geography itself. The steppe could not stop him. Snow could not freeze him. Rivers could not block his path. Now it was the mountains' turn. The Caucasus Mountains, the oldest walls of the earth, for centuries considered impassable barriers for armies. But in Timur's eyes, no obstacle was greater than will. The rumors spread first. Rumors spread among the people of the Caucasus. Timur is coming. He's crossed frozen mountains. He has passed impassable valleys in a week. Wherever he goes, the land flattens beneath him. In Tbilisi, a dervish said, "The mountains will stop him." But even mountains have a destiny. The march into the White Peaks. As Timur's army approached the snow-covered peaks of the Caucasus, his commanders shivered. The Arslan brothers whispered, "Lord, these mountains devour armies." Timur stopped and stared at the mountains for a long time. Then he spoke softly, "They devour armies, but my army does not march to be devoured. It marches to devour." When the wind struck his face, there was no fear in him, no worry, no hesitation. The mountains sensed this silence, as if what stood before them was not a man, but something else. The impossible path. Ordinary armies follow mountain passes. The roads are narrow. The soldiers slow down. The cold breaks them. Hunger kills them. Timur knew all this. That is why he did not take the road. He made his own road. Mohendi's Berlijanin Musazisi, the miracle of the engineers. Timur's special engineers were like a machine that never rested, shattering rock, cutting tunnels through ice, working day and night. There were no passes in those mountains. Timur created them. There were no roads. Timur opened them. Timur had a saying, "If the mountain will not walk, then I will." The panic of the mountain kings. When the rulers of the Caucasus heard these reports, they lost their minds. The lords of Azerbaijan said, "Timur cannot cross the mountains. This is impossible." The princes of Georgia cried, "Timur is not human. He's crossing the mountains." Armenian commanders shouted, "This man's army leaves no tracks on the snow. It's as if they're made of shadow." And each of them felt the same helplessness. We are not ready for war. But Timur, the siege of Tbilisi, Tiflis. Tbilisi, Tiflis. Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, was a great city. Thick walls, wide bridges, stone fortifications. When Timur saw the city, he said, "This wall is not stronger than the people inside it." Its defender, King Bagrat, was a hard man that he challenged Timur. "I do not fear you. This city will not surrender." Timur answered in a calm voice, "I do not speak to walls, that I speak to fate." The first blow, the river trick. Tbilisi's defense depended on the Kara River. No army could easily cross it. It flowed right in front of the walls.
Timur Lauged.
He whispered to his engineers, "Water is not smarter than I am." And do you know what they did? In the middle of the night, while no one noticed, they diverted the river upstream. For a single hour, its flow was changed. The soldiers cried out in shock. The river has changed direction. And in that 1 hour, Timur's army crossed the water in silence. The second blow, the wall of smoke. Timur's archers lit a special smoke that wrapped itself around the city walls. It burned the eyes, stole the breath, confused the defenders. Warriors on the walls shouted, "We can't see! We can't breathe!" Georgian commanders panicked. The final blow, the silent climb. When night fell, the black wolves said, "We will climb the walls." No one believed them, but they did. They climbed silently, like shadows, like goats on a cliff, daggers in hand. And at dawn, the gates of Tbilisi were opened from the inside. The city had fallen. Timuran Atalidi v Masaji Timur's justice and message. When Timur entered the city, he turned to his own men and said, "Every city thinks before it submits. Those who submit, I will protect. Those that burn from their stubbornness, I will burn with that same stubbornness." But later, the people of Tbilisi said, "Timur destroyed, yes, but he also brought order." Even in his justice, there was balance. Azerbaijan's surrender. After Tbilisi, the lords of Azerbaijan spoke only one word. "He has come." And then another. "We surrender." Cities opened their gates. The people bowed. There was no war. Because everyone understood that to fight a leader who could carve his way through mountains was nothing but madness. The world calls him something new. After this campaign, the world gave Timur new titles. The Breaker of Mountains, Fate Walker in the North, the man who forces stones to kneel. An old sage of Azerbaijan wrote, "If even the mountains bow before him, how could we not?" The Legend of the Unbroken, the Epic of Timur Part 13, when the world starts turning toward him. After taking Tbilisi, Timur stood for a while, looking at the cool breath of the mountains. When the people yielded to him, a deep silence echoed through the peaks. Timur listened to that silence. "The mountains are quiet," he said. "That means it is now the people's turn." As his army moved through the Caucasus, it no longer merely conquered, ether-vested. Even its shadow seemed to stretch across borders. And now fate was bringing him on his road back toward new conflicts. The second fall of Georgia. Months after the fall of Tbilisi, the Georgian kings began to gather strength again. "Timur has gone far," they said. "The mountains will protect us. We can rise up again." But they forgot one thing. If Timur had conquered a city, then in his eyes that city was now his responsibility. And responsibilities are never left half done. Spies brought word. The Georgian king Bagrat is raising an army. Timur only bowed his head slightly. "I defeated him once," he said. "Defeating him a second time is easy." He turned back toward the mountains. This time the army moved much faster, because the roads had already been found and opened by Timur. He said to his soldiers, "The first time I came, these mountains were strangers to me. Now they are my friends. The storm returns." The Georgian army built barricades in the passes. The walls were reinforced. King Bagrat boasted proudly, Our first defeat was a surprise that it will not happen again. When Timur heard this, he said, "A man may make the same mistake twice, a leader cannot." He split his army in two. One part he sent beneath the mountains, around the flanks, or another he sent forward through misty valleys in silence. He himself appeared with a small, visible force. The Georgians thought his was a weak, exposed unit and rushed to attack. But what they attacked was only Timur's shadow. The real army struck from behind. It was over in an hour. Georgia knelt once again. King Bagrat fled. The people said, "If this man wants something, no mountain can hide it from him." Timur restored Orderto the Caucasus a second time. The look to the west, Anatolia, prepare yourself. As Timur descended from the Caucasus, a great map was spread out before his army. On the western side of it was a word, Rum, Anatolia. In Anatolia, there were countless beyliks, small kingdoms, petty powers, all at odds with each other, all in chaos, each circling its own little throne. Bahadur asked, "Lord, are you looking there?" Timur said nothing, but his eyes moved calmly across the map.
Sivas, Erzincan, Ankara, Konya, Aydın, Germiyan, Ottoman lands.
After a long silence, he said, "The West is in turmoil, and turmoil waits for a leader." This sentence carried a terrifying meaning for the entire army. Timur's eyes are now on Anatolia. A whisper from the south, the Mamluks tremble. When Timur returned to Azerbaijan with his army, an interesting report came from Syria. The Mamluk Sultanate, ruling over Egypt and Syria, was deeply disturbed by Timur's conquests. The Sultan sent envoys. "Do not approach our borders. We are a strong state. We can stop your army." Timur looked at the envoys, a faint smile on his lips. "Tell your Sultan this. I do not approach borders. When I arrive, there are no borders left." The envoys left trembling. The return to Azerbaijan order in the people's eyes. When Timur returned to Azerbaijan with his army, the people were waiting for him. And believe it or not, the cities welcomed him with applause. Why? Because Timur's arrival meant taxes would become lighter, as cities would be properly defended, merchants could breathe easily, law and order would be restored. An old woman stepped before Timur's horse and said, "You come with the sword, but your sword works for us."
Timur replied,
If a leader does not threaten his own people, his sword becomes the sword of justice. Timur was no longer only a feared warrior, he was a respected architect of order. Order. The calm before the greatest storm. Timur stayed in Azerbaijan for a few months. In that time, he enlarged his army, formed new units, strengthened the lands he had conquered, forged new alliances, wiped out the last remains of the Golden Horde, reinforced his engineer corps, doubled his intelligence network. By now the world knew. Timur was not stopping. Timur was preparing. Timur was planning. And if Timur was planning, something somewhere was going to break. The last line of part 13. One night, Timur climbed a lonely hill. The sky was clear. The stars shone with a sharp, cold light. Timur looked up at them and said, "I did not come to take the world, that I came to wake it up." And the wind blew as if answering him. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part 14, the shadow that reached the west. Timur's tent in Azerbaijan was hot and alive with movement even in the silence of the night. His army was resting, the people were at peace. But Timur's mind did not sleep. Maps, reports, messages, spy notes, all of them lay before him like a web of fate. Bahadur asked softly, "Lord, your eyes are turned west. What do you see there?" Timur whispered as he stared at the map. "Shadows of weak kings, and to erase a shadow, you must become the sun." The call of Baghdad, the last struggles of the Jalayirids Sultanate. The Jalayirids, a state holding parts of Iraq and Iran, rotting for years, unable to convince anyone of its strength except itself. When Sultan Ahmad Jalayir learned that the Caucasus had fallen, he panicked. He sent a letter to Timur. "O Timur, you have trampled our lands as much as you pleased. Come no further west. I count you as a friend. I will not flee from you, but I do not wish to stand against you." Timur read the letter. He remained silent. One of the Arslan brothers asked, "Lord, did this man threaten us or beg?"
Timur smiled.
"He did both," he said, "and that is the final stage of a ruler. A strategy woven like silk." When Timur resolved to march on the Jalayirids, his emirs warned him, "Lord, the Jalayirid army is not weak. There could be a great battle." Timur placed a sheet of inked paper on the table. "If you push the paper, the ink scatters," he said. "If you touch only the corner, the paper falls by itself." He then pointed at Baghdad on the map. "We will touch the corner." The Jalayirids' weakest point was that their people did not trust them. Timur knew this. Information from the populace revealed how rotten the Jalayirid state had become. And a rotten stadius conquered from within. March to Baghdad, a river of steel. Timur's army advanced southward, between rivers and valleys. City after city opened its gates. Why? Because when Timur came, plunder was forbidden. Laws were strict and fair. Merchants were protected. Waterways were put in order. For a people, conquest can sometimes be a form of salvation. As they neared Baghdad, spies brought news. The city is gripped by fear. The Sultan is holding the people by force. Timur spoke a single sentence. A leader who holds his people by force has already been abandoned by them. The siege that never happened. Sultan Ahmad Jalayir reinforced the walls of Baghdad, archers, soldiers, catapults. He was certain there would be a great battle. But Timur chose a different path. He cut off the city's water supply, blocked its trade routes, and stopped all incoming provisions. Yet he did not fire a single arrow at the walls. The people did not understand. Where is the war? Why doesn't Timur attack? One of the Arslan brothers asked. Lord, why are we waiting?
Timur smiled.
I am not at war. The Sultan is at war with his own city that I am only watching. And indeed, rebellion erupted inside the city. The people wanted to open the gates. The soldiers wanted to keep them shut. Baghdad's walls were not falling to the sword, they were falling to fear. When the gates opened. One morning, the gates of Baghdad opened on their own. A merchant of Baghdad shouted, "Let Timur come. Timur brings justice." The army entered in silence.
No plunder, no massacre, no chaos.
When Timur entered the palace, Sultan Ahmad had fled. Timur only shook his head. A ruler who runs has already died. Baghdad's lesson. The people of Baghdad gathered. Children watched Timur from the rooftops. Merchants waited. Everyone was filled with curiosity. Timur climbed upon a high stone and spoke. I did not take this city for tribute, that I took this city for justice. For a city without justice is doomed to fall. People whispered. This man is not just a warrior, he is a lawgiver. And indeed, in Baghdad, Timur reorganized the taxes, had the city cleaned, repaired the roads, helped the poor, reopened the water channels. The people said, we were waiting for a conqueror, we found a savior. The echo in the west, the first shadow over the Ottomans. While Timur was setting order in Baghdad, strange news came from Anatolia. Ottoman Sultan Bayezid Yildirim, a rising power, a rapidly growing empire. Bayezid said, let Timur not come west. We can be friends, as long as he bows to me. These words reached Timur. The emirs waited. After a long silence, Timur said, tell him this, I do not bow. They bow before me. Last words of part 14. That night, Timur looked up at the stars and whispered, I have become the master of the East. Now let me see the light of the West as well. And fate heard his whisper. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur part 15, when the West beholds the storm. After Timur established order over Baghdad, the warriors sitting around the fire began to whisper. Where is Timur looking now? Where have his eyes turned? To the west, to Anatolia. And truly, as Timur departed from Baghdad, his gaze was fixed on a distant horizon. The name of that line was Anatolia. There, a power was rising, very fast, very ambitious, very bright. This power was the Ottoman Empire. And the man ruling it was one of the sharpest blades in history. Yildirim Bayezid, Bayezid the Thunderbolt. The first whisper of conflict. The words Bayezid sent to Timur echoed through Timur's tent. Anatolia belongs to me, that I can acknowledge Timur, but I will not let him be above me.
Timur smiled.
I did not come to be above anyone, he said. I came to bring order. Bahadur asked, Lord, the Ottomans are strong. When power grows too quickly, its roots are weak. weak. Then he looked to the map. On the western side it read, RUM'd lands where the Ottomans had risen.
Timur whispered.
Rum will hear my storm. Before the west, the road through Syria. Marching straight into Anatolia would have been easy. But Timur never chose what was easy. He walked with strategy. So first he had to align the south, the lands of Syria. For the Mamluks of Syria, Egypt had said, "We will not allow Timur to advance west." Timur answered with a single sentence, "If you wish to stop me, you must think faster than I do." But no one could think as fast as him. The march south, the desert that broke before him. The road to Syria was harsh, deserts, jagged rocks, dry valleys. But Timur's army had one defining trait. It could make the impossible possible. When the march began, the soldiers looked to the sky. "This desert will break us," they said. Timur stopped, took sand into his hand. "A man who fears sand," he said, "cannot create a storm." And the march continued. Wells were dug, nomad trackers opened new routes, engineers built reservoirs, merchant caravans brought provisions. With every step the army took, the desert's fate was rewritten. Aleppo, Halep, the gateway to the west. The heart of Syria was Aleppo. When its governor heard of Timur, he cried out in fear, "Strengthen the walls. If Timur is coming, disaster is coming." As Timur approached the walls of Aleppo, he said to his soldiers, "This city will not be taken by bravery. This city will be taken by intelligence." And he laid upon Aleppo of the most subtle plans history had ever seen. Timur's three-step plan for Aleppo. 1. Win the people. Spies who watched the mood of the citizens heard the same complaint. "We are hungry. Our rulers have forgotten us." When Timur heard this, he said, "If the people are unhappy, the city has already fallen." 2. A trick of war, the fake army. Timur arranged what appeared to be a massive siege army in front of Aleppo. But half of the tents were empty. The soldiers rotated guard posts. Fires and torches where Medito appear more numerous at night. Rumors spread inside the city. "Timur's army is twice the size of our walls." 3. Evening assault, the silent wind. At night, Aleppo was vulnerable. Timur sent the black wolves over the walls at midnight. By morning, the city gates were open. Aleppo had fallen, no resistance, no blood. Without a battle, the people said, "Timur did not come, fate did." Sultan Nasir's ominous news. When Aleppo fell, the Mamluk Sultan Nasir of Egypt shouted at his envoys, his face pale, "Where is Timur going? Stop him." The envoys answered, trembling, "Master, Timur is not going anywhere. Once he begins his march, wherever he goes becomes the name of destiny." Timur's first step toward the west. After Aleppo, he gathered his army again. The people brought him food and supplies. Engineers repaired damaged roads. Merchants reopened their routes with confidence. Near Aleppo, Timur climbed a hill. He turned his eyes west, toward the line of Anatolia's horizon, and said, I did not conquer Aleppo, that I opened the gate to the west. Bahadur whispered. To Rum then?
Timur answered.
Yes, but first I must change the wind. Timur versus Bayezid, the shadow duel begins. At that moment, the world's two greatest powers felt each other for the first time. Timur, the storm of the east, Bayezid, the lightning of the west. There was no battle why no clash of armies. But history saw the shadows of two giants fall over each other. An Ottoman commander later wrote, Bayezid felt that the east was gathering a dark power. Even the sky seemed tense. A Timurid commander said, Timur heard a storm rising from the west, but that storm was a child compared to our wind. Last line of part 15. That night, Timur looked at the walls of Aleppo and whispered, This is only the beginning, that I am walking toward the heart of the world, and no one will be able to stop me. The wind answered him, and history recorded that wind. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part 16, the fall of the southern kingdoms. After Aleppo fell, all of Syria became a low murmur. It was as if even the deserts were whispering. Timur has come. What comes next? Some said, he is going to Jerusalem. Others said, he will take Egypt. But Timur had something greater in mind. Wherever the heart of the world beat, Timur would walk there. And now that heart was Damascus, the march through the desert of ash. The road from Aleppo to Damascus was through the hardest part of the desert. Scorching heat by day, freezing cold by night, little water, no shade. But Timur's army moved like a legend. Nomad warriors read this land better than an archer reads his bow. As Timur walked, he said, The desert cannot stop us. The desert lies beneath the feet of those who walk. And so it was. Every day. And new wells were dug, supplies were distributed in order horses were rested. Engineers worked night and day, spies reported every inch ahead. Every step the army took turned the desert into a road. Damascus, Sam, the jewel of the Levant. Damascus, one of the oldest cities in history, streets that smelled of ancient prophets, silver domes, the scent of spice and learning. One of the strongest fortresses of the Mamluks. Sultan Nasir fearfully ordered the governor of Damascus, You will resist Timur. Do not you dare surrender. The gates of Damascus were shut. The walls were reinforced. Hundreds of archers stood guard. But behind the walls, there was another truth. The people were not pleased. They were tired of heavy taxes, of Mamluk brutality, of endless oppression. And a rumor was spreading. If Timur comes, justice comes. Timur's three-stage plan for Damascus. Timur came to Damascus not just as a commander, but as a master of strategy. 1. Win the people to his side. Timur's envoys and spies infiltrated the city. Among the people, they spread words like, Timur does not harm those who surrender.
Timur protects merchants.
Timur rules with justice. These words spread through Damascus like a wind. 2. Fake pressure on the walls. Timur placed massive siege engines at the western gates of the city. But they were not for a real assault. They were only to distract the people, force Mamluk Commander Stowe reinforce the wrong side, wear down the morale of the city. Throughout the night, fireballs were launched, but the walls were barely scratched. 3. The real attack, the conquest from within. The real assault came from inside the city with rebel groups. Timur's influence over people was so great that some of Damascus' own citizens cooperated with his men. One night, the northern gate of the city was opened from within. The fall of Damascus. By morning, Timur's soldiers were walking silently through the streets of Damascus. There were no screams, and no great battle, and no resistance. Damascus had fallen. Timur's footsteps echoed in ancient stone streets. Merchants waited in fear. People watched from their windows. Children covered their mouths and held their breath. Timur stopped with his horse before the great mosque. And he said, "I did not come to take this city, I came to wake it up." Timur's great justice in Damascus. Timur gathered the city's notables. He judged the Mamluk governors, he punished the oppressive officials, he had soldiers who plundered or coveted the people's property flogged, he placed mosques, libraries, and marketplaces under his protection. Then he declared, "Whoever has lost his property, let him come to me. Whoever has suffered injustice will find justice. Whoever wishes to trade, my roads are open." The people of Damascus were astonished. A woman said, "We were expecting a monster, a wise man came." A man said, "I did not see one who conquered us. I saw one who saved us." The collapse of the Mamluk Sultanate. When Sultan Nasir received the news, his hands trembled. Damascus has fallen. Aleppo has fallen. What are we going to do? His advisors said, to wage war against Timuris, to choose suicide. But the Sultan's pride swelled. "We will fight," he declared. When Timur heard this, he only smiled. "Pride," he said, "is the weakest armor in war." The Mamluk army tried to face Timur south of Damascus. It lasted only an hour. In 1 hour, the cavalry scattered, the archers fled, the commanders surrendered, the Sultan retreated without truly fighting. The strength of Timur's army shattered the pride of a nation. Timur's great return, the storm approaching Anatolia. After Damascus was taken, Timur said, "The south is finished. Now I can turn to the west." All his emirs fell silent at once, because everyone knew the name of the west. The Ottomans, Yildirim Bayezid, a great war. Timur looked at the map. His eyes fell upon Anatolia. "Bayezid," he said, "I am not coming to you. You are coming to me." Closing of Part 16. As night fell, Timur climbed a hill and looked up at the stars. "I woke the east," he said. "I set the south in order. I brought the north to its knees." Then he turned his face west. Now it is the heart of the world's turn. The wind fell silent. The sky became still. For history already knew that a great reckoning was coming. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part 17. The two suns begin to collide. After Damascus fell, a dark silence spread over the world that it was as if every nation, every city, every ruler was asking the same question. Where will Timur march now? Everyone knew the answer, but no one dared to say it aloud. To the west, to the Ottomans. The great fracture in Anatolia. Anatolia was in great turmoil at that time. Bayezid the Thunderbolt was very strong, very harsh, and had risen very quickly, but that rapid growth had terrified the Beyliks. The Beylik of Aydin, Germian, the Karamanids, the remnants of Eretna, the rulers of Shivas, they all feared the Ottomans, and only one name came to their minds as a solution: Timur. Secret letters were sent to Timur. Come, O Timur, save us from Bayezid's oppression. In the land of Rum, one man is choking us. A sultan who kills even his own brothers. We cannot stand against him. We will open our gates to you. Timur read these letters. He said only this: where oppression grows, there is no true ruler that I bring order where there is no leader. The first war of words between Timur and Bayezid. When Bayezid heard that these letters had been sent, he burned with anger. He sent a letter to Timur. It said, Timur, you are master of the East. I am Sultan of the West. Let us know our borders. Do not interfere in the land of Rum. If you are great, I am great as well. Do not challenge me. Timur read the letter. Silence fell over the tent. The commanders asked, Lord, will you answer? Timur raised his head. His eyes were like steel, and he said, He has not written me a letter that he has challenged my destiny. He took a sheet of paper and wrote his reply, Bayezid. Doors open before me, because my intent is justice. Those who flee your tyranny have taken refuge with me. I will not return them. One who has taken refuge in me will not see betrayal. You think yourself great. Mountains are large, but the wind is greater than the mountain. The wind is my will. When this letter reached Bayezid, the Ottoman palace turned cold as ice. Bayezid said only one thing: so he will fight. Shivas, the heart of Anatolia. The next point was Shivas. The remaining Forsov Cutty Burnedin there had declared loyalty to Timur. When Bayezid heard this, he shouted in fury, I will not leave Shivas to him. But the people of Shivas were saying, where Timur comes, justice comes. Where Bayezid comes, taxes come. Shivas trembled like a spark between two great powers.
Timur marcet, Bayezid marcet.
The fate of Sivas was the moment when two suns rose into the same sky for the first time. The siege of Shivas, the test of steel and will. When Timur approached Shivas, the city was in turmoil. Some wanted the Ottomans, some wanted Timur, some didn't want war at all. But fate does not ask what people want. It takes them all in. Timur looked at the city walls. Jahangir asked, Lord, will we attack? Timur's answer was firm but calm. A city cannot have two masters. Timur laid siege to the city. Ottoman forces endured within. It lasted 3 days. For 3 days fire, stone, smoke, prayer and death mixed together. But on the 4th day, the gates opened. Timur entered the city. And he said, Shivas is mine because destiny willed it so. Bayezid's fury, when the sky rumbled. When news of Shiva's fall reached Bayezid, even the columns of the palace trembled. Bayezid the thunderbolt roared with rage. I will strike Timur like a bolt of lightning. But his advisors were afraid. Timur is not easily stopped. His army is highly disciplined. He has brought the Caucasus, Iran, and Damascus to their knees. Bayezid replied, I am the Ottoman that I am made of lightning. Timur's first great reply I wore one with words. Bayezid sent another letter. You should have left Shivas to me. If you do not, you will not be able to protect your sons. These words carried a threat. As Timur read the letter, he laughed aloud. Then he wrote this: The fate of my sons is written in the sky. The fate of your sons will be written before me. If you wish to speak with the sword, then we shall speak. But remember, the sky creates lightning, but the earth creates mountains. I am the mountain. These words spread throughout the world. A chronicler wrote, those words were like a sword stroke. Before the battle even began, Bayezid had been wounded. The storm has a destination, the fate of Ankara. Shivas had fallen, Damascus had been taken, Aleppo had bowed, the gates of Anatolia were open. Now the eyes of history turned to one place, Ankara. For by now everyone knew. The paths of Timur and Bayezid would cross there. The Battle of Ankara had not yet begun. But the fate of the world had already begun to whisper itself over those lands. One night, Timur opened the flap of his tent and stepped into the darkness. He whispered into the distance, Come, Bayezid, let us write our destinies together. The wind did not blow. The sky was silent. For before the last great storm, history itself was holding its breath. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part 18, Before the Sky Breaks. The burning heat that settled over Ankara's plain whispered like a voice buried deep in the earth. Something is coming. Even the wind was hesitant, as if it feared that wherever it blew, someone's fate would change. After leaving Shivas, Timur walked calmly toward Ankara, his army stretching behind him like a shadow. Not a shadow, a storm. And that storm was not only advancing, it was reshaping the world as it moved. Two kings, two paths. At that time, Bayezid was in Bursa, holding Timur's letter in his hand. The letter burned like fire, but could not extinguish the rage inside him. Bayezid shouted, This man dares threaten me. Who is he? I am the lightning of the Ottomans. But his advisors whispered, Majesty, this man has toppled continents. Bayezid slammed his fist on the table. I have united continents as well. This was true. Bayezid was strong, very strong. But power grows only when it stands in the right place. Placed wrongly, it cracks. Bayezid was now walking toward that crack, yet had no idea he was breaking. Timur's mind sharp as silence. Meanwhile, Timur, as he neared Ankara, walked alone in the quietest hours of the night. The moon hung pale in the sky. Timur's shadow stretched before him like a long blade. Jahangir approached. "Lord, this war will be very great that I can feel it."
Timur replied,
"I do not look at how big a war is, that I look at how it ends." "And how will it end?" Jahangir asked. Timur stopped, looked up at the stars, and said, "Fate bends to me." In that moment, Jahangir could say nothing. For those words sounded not as if they came from a man, but from history itself. The armies gather. Timur's army. Tens of thousands of cavalry, the Black Wolves who crossed mountains, engineer corps, light-mounted archers, armored falcon cavalry, networks of spies, lightning-fast units from Azerbaijan, Khorasan, and the Caucasus. The world called this army the Iron River. Bayezid's army. Of the hardest soldiers of Rumelia, Janissaries, Balkan cavalry, Anatolian contingents, Serbian allies, a camp full of fresh troops. The world called this force the Lightning Army. Two great powers, two great wills, two great destinies, now stood face to face. But before the battle began, the greatest clash took place in the mind. The messenger of thunder meets the storm. Bayezid sent a messenger to Timur. The envoy was a proud man. When he stood before Timur, he bowed only slightly and spoke in an arrogant tone. "I come in the name of the might of the Ottomans." Sultan Bayezid says, "If you enter Rum, I will enter your lands." Timur was silent. The envoy continued, "Bayezid say she will not share the same sky with you." That sentence filled the tent. The emirs held their breath. At last Timur spoke. "Tell Bayezid this. The sky is wide enough to carry us both. But the world can carry only one of us." At these words, the envoy collapsed to his knees, shaking with fear. Timur went on. "War has not come to the door. War has already broken down the door and entered." Bayezid's fury, lightning strikes the ground. When this answer reached Bayezid, the sky suddenly darkened. He drew his sword and raised it to the heavens. "May fate protect me from Timur," he shouted. But then, a quiet soldier murmured, "Majesty, perhaps fate is not waiting to protect you from him. Perhaps it is waiting to stand beside you." Bayezid did not hear that, but history did. Timur prepares the trap of traps. Timur, however, was not planning to strike Istanbul, nor Ankara itself. He was planning to strike Fethusallah Bayezid's army. He drew the battlefield in the dirt and said, "This war will not be won with horses. It will be won with thirst." He gave his orders. The wells will be closed. The water routes will be cut. The Ottoman army will be encircled. The sun will steal their strength. The earth will break their will. He summoned the Arslan brothers. "You will seal the north. The Black Wolves will hold the south. The Falcon cavalry will press from the west. The east is already mine." Jahangir muttered a question. "From where will Bayezid escape?"
Timur answered,
"He will not. The night before fate." On the night before the battle, Timur climbed alone onto a rock. Far away, Bayezid's campfires glowed in the dark. Between the two armies lay a sea of black.
Timur whispered.
I am not doing this war because I desire it. This war is happening because the world has called for me. He closed his eyes and continued. I do not follow fate that I walk along the road that fate itself takes. The wind rose, the smell of the night changed, the horses grew restless. For tomorrow, the fate of the world would be written. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part 19 Ankara, the day the sky chose a king. As the sun rose, a red light spread over the plain of Ankara. The ground was dry, the air scorching. It was as if the sun had drawn closer just to watch the coming battle. No birds sang that morning. Only the wind moved, and the wind whispered. Today, the world will decide. The armies stand face to face. On the eastern side, Timur's iron river stretched into the distance. A mounted archers loosing arrows at a gallop, commando units marching like the black wolves at night, armored falcon cavalry, engineer corps of mobile siege engines, banners blazing like suns of silence, discipline waiting. On the western side, Bayezid's lightning army was arrayed. Unshakable janissaries, the hard cavalry of Rumelia, the heavy armored units of Serbian princes, multi-ethnic soldiers from Anatolia, raiders moving like shadows, and Bayezid himself, standing tall beneath the banner. The two armies looked at one another. But this was no ordinary gaze. Their eyes were asking, which of us will the world choose? Timur like a mountain on his horse. Timur stood at the front of his line. He was old, but every year of his age was a victory. He was scarred, but each scar was a seal upon his invincibility. He was silent, but that silence was more terrifying than the roar of an entire army. Jahangir whispered, Lord, shall the battle begin? Timur did not squint nor flinch, still staring at the enemy line. And he said, No, let the sun tire them first. Before the battle even began, Timur made his first move. He waited. To an ordinary strategist, this would be madness. But to Timur, the battlefield was a chessboard, and he could hear the breath of every piece on it. The Ottoman army burned in the heat. The horses were thirsty. The towers cast no shade. The water lines had already been cut by Timur. He murmured, I do not fight with water, that I fight with patience. Bayezid charges like lightning. Bayezid was impatient, like a provoked lion. My army does not wait. I am lightning, he roared. And he launched the first attack. The Ottoman army charged at Timur's lines with shocking speed. The lightning army was so fast that even the earth could not keep up with their pounding hooves. Serbian cavalry attacked, shouting, For Rum! For Bayezid! The janissaries advanced as one wall. But Timur only watched. Inside his mind, he saw the position of every soldier, every tiny gap, every shadow where an opportunity hid. The first shift, the dance of the arrows. As the Ottomans charged, Timur raised his hand. A single gesture, and the archers moved. Thousands of mounted archers spread to the flanks at once, falling back as if retreating, then unleashing a storm of arrows. The arrows fell like a blizzard. Serbian horsemen were stunned. Rumelian units hesitated. Yet Timur's attack was still not a full assault. It was a dance of attrition. Caucasian units shouted, "Wear them down! Wear them down so their collapse will come faster." Timur's secret weapon, the Tatar troops. In Bayezid's army there were many Tatar soldiers. But they were, in truth, Timur's old people. When they heard his name, a different feeling stirred within them. As Timur's forces drew near, their commanders gave an order. "Leave Bayezid's lines. Return to your own Khan." And thousands of Tatar soldiers stepped out of the Ottoman ranks and joined Timur's army. When Bayezid saw this, he went mad with rage. "What are you worth? Is this betrayal?" Timur watched from afar. There was no pity in his eyes. "In war," he said, "everyone returns home. The final collapse, the desert becomes the enemy." The sun was high overhead. The Ottoman army was thirsty. The soldiers from the old Beyliks no longer wished to fight. The Tatars had changed sides. The Janissaries were trapped. Bayezid realized the battle had turned. But he would not retreat. Because he was the banner, he was the lightning. Timur's three-sided encirclement tightened. The black wolves slipped in from the rear. The armored falcons split the center. The mounted archer sealed the ring. On the plain of Ankara, a terrible silence fell. And in that silence, an army broke. Bayezid's forces collapsed. The capture of the Sultan, when thunder is silenced. Bayezid tried to flee. He drove his horse at full gallop. But Timur's cavalry seemed sent to catch his fate. Breathless in the fastest moments of his life, he fell. His horse went down. The earth folded over him. They surrounded Bayezid. They took his weapon. And in that moment, for the first time in Ottoman history, a sultan was taken captive. When he was brought into Timur's tent, Timur did not even stand. Bayezid kept his eyes on the ground. Timur asked quietly, "Why did you fight?" Bayezid answered harshly, "To rule the world." Timur shook his head. "No," he said, "the world cannot be ruled. The world bows on Leto, the one who deserves it." Then he added, "You became lightning, but I became the storm." Those words were carved into history. The day the sky chose. With the victory at Ankara, the world understood this. The East had knelt before Timur. The South had bowed to Timur. The North could not escape Timur. Even the West had submitted to his will. And the sky passed judgment. Timur is undefeated. Here is part 20 fully translated into English, keeping the epic tone and your original structure. The legend of the Unbroken, the epic of Timur Part XX, the emperor who outlived time. When the dust of Ankara finally settled, the world lost its breath. Timur's name no longer meant just a commander, a sovereign, a conqueror. He had become a principle, a destiny, an age. From east to west, north to south, everyone now asked the same question. Where are Timur's limits? The answer was clear. Timur had no limits. After Ankara, the world fell. Before the great victory at Ankara, there was no one in the world who had not heard Timur's name. But after Ankara, his name was no longer whispered in fear, but with a trembling made of respect. Iran was completely under his control. The Caucasus had knelt. The Golden Horde had been shattered. Syria breathed by his order. Even the Ottoman throne watched for his decisions. Everywhere he conquered, Timur left behind a single saying: "A leader who has justice cannot be overthrown. A leader who has tyranny destroys himself." And so, cities no longer trembled when they saw him coming. Cities no waited for him. Timur's greatest dream, the campaign to China. After Ankara, everyone assumed Timur would finally grow tired, that he would rest, withdraw to his palace. But Timur's spirit never stopped. Only a few months after the victory at Ankara, he gathered his commanders. He pointed to the farthest east of the map. China. Jahangir was stunned. "Lord, China is very far at a vast empire. Mountains, deserts, armies." Timur's reply was quiet but absolute. "What is difficult is beautiful. Fate has not finished writing for me." These words should not have come from the mouth of an old man. They were the words of a young conqueror, a young bolt of lightning. But time did not touch what was inside Timur. He was not growing old, he was only growing greater. The China campaign, the last journey of the world. Timur began preparations for what history would remember as his greatest campaign. Tens of thousands of new soldiers were recruited, the army's supplies and logistics were redesigned, the route to the Chinese frontier was chosen, engineers built bridges, spies prepared the way. And at last, Timur set out. His warriors whispered among themselves. At his age, with this much power, after so many conquests already? But the answer was always the same. Timur walks. For Timur, there was no such thing as age. For Timur, there was no such thing as stopping. For Timur, roads existed for one purpose only: to be walked. And this march was perhaps the journey in history that stood closest to eternity itself. Otrar, the last land touched by the storm. On the road to China, Timur reached the city of Otrar. Winter was harsh. The wind was ice. The cold cut through bone like a dagger. Yet even as Timur stepped into his tent, there was no weariness in his stride. He said to his attendants, "Tomorrow we continue our march." But that night, the world became quiet. The wind stopped. Even the sand ceased to move. It was as if nature itself knew that something was about to be taken from it. And when morning came, Timur fell ill. This was the man who throughout his life had never feared the sword, never flinched from betrayal, mocked dark armies, and broke them. But the cold became a patient enemy against him. Illness settled inside the tent like death itself. The commanders waited outside. The black wolves hid their tears. Whispers spread through the army. Perhaps not even fate could stop him. Timur's final words. On the last night of his life, Timur was alone in his tent. He looked one last time at the map. His finger traced the road to China. And he murmured, "I would have reached this place, but fate has already written my name there." Then a faint light slipped in from outside. Timur closed his eyes and said, "The world was not shaped by my breath, but by my will. I did not collapse. I walked, and I was never defeated. And that night, Timur's breath ceased. But his will did not. His will was carved forever into the body of history. Timur's legacy. When Timur died, his armies were still vast, his empire was still immense, his name was still terrifying, his order still held. But more importantly, when Timur died, it was not just an emperor who passed. It was Anarth that ended. The name of that era was the Age of the Unbroken. From that day on, Timur's name has meant the nightmare of kings, the teacher of generals, the hope of justice for common people. The storm of history, the embodiment of pure will, and the only leader who never knew defeat. One historian wrote, "Timur did not die. He became history itself." And so, the great, epic, eternity-scented tale you asked for ends here. But legends do not truly end. They only close the page.